I lived on the Pakistan/Indian border for a couple years as a missionary. There was a humongous web strung up between two trees that had a dead child all wrapped up. The kid had been climbing trees and became entangled. When the locals cut him down, they said his insides were like soup, like he was just a huge flesh bag full of liquid. I did see them cut him out of the webs, and when they picked him up, his eyes were like backwards, if that makes sense. Like, not that the back of his eyes were in the front, but that his eyes were drooping inward as opposed to being flush with the face. When they sat him upright, I guess it broke the surface tension and they just sort of melted out of his eye sockets. If you've ever seen a big glob of fat in a roast pan or something, it kind of looked like that, like greasy, chunky jelly. It was honestly horrible. The locals did not bother calling the police because the police, they were honestly completely unhelpful. You had to bribe them to get them to do anything, and even then they only halfway try. So they know about it. They just kind of shrug and say a big spider got him, and leave it at that. Nobody thinks it's strange or anything. Apparently it's really reclusive and they usually do not see it. When I asked how big it actually is, the guy I was talking to just spread his arms as far as they go. So I'm gonna say like 4 feet in diameter? Maybe 3, I don't know. Just hold your arms out lengthwise then vertical, and you'll have as much info as I have. Probably not really what the thread is aimed at, but I always thought it was interesting that there are just big-ass tree-dwelling spiders in India and Pakistan and nobody talks about it.
Early last year, I met a man on the train from Raumati to Wellington. He was middle-aged from what I could tell, about 50, or maybe he was in his late 40s. We started talking, and he told me he had been a soldier in the Vietnam War. Obviously, I was keen to change the subject, so I asked if he was interested in mysteries or the unexplained. He laughed slightly and said, "You won't believe me, but in Nam, I nearly got my head ripped off by a spider the size of a car. Do you believe that?" I stared for a moment, then, ignoring the question, asked, "Could you tell me the story?" He wasn't an overly good soldier, apparently. He could barely handle a gun and had trouble taking orders. This didn't make him hugely popular with the commanders, but he was adored by his fellow soldiers. He described himself as a bit of a clown in those bad times. It was during a long tramp through dense jungle that he became separated from his platoon and became lost in the bush. Panicking, he ran madly through the jungle and suddenly tripped on a tree root and was sent tumbling into a small valley, mostly hidden by vegetation. After pulling himself off the ground, he observed his surroundings. He saw that the valley walls were too high and too steep to climb out of, and that there appeared to be no other possible exit route. He considered shouting for help, but decided against it, as there could easily be enemy troops nearby, and assuming he hadn't strayed too far from his platoon, he didn't want to put his fellow men in danger, so he began wandering around the valley edge, looking for possible means of escape. After about 2 hours of doing this, he heard a rustling sound behind him, accompanied seconds later by a disturbing clicking noise. He stood still for some time, but eventually decided it had just been a common animal, like a bird. He continued on walking. After what the man assumed was around an hour, he began to feel thirsty and had still found no means of escape. Hoping that the valley would end with a dip that would be easy to walk up, he traveled forward. Suddenly he heard another rushing and clicking noise near his side. Again he stood and waited. As he looked around for the cause of the noise, there was another, closer sound, and he turned in the direction of it. He nearly screamed when he saw it. Through a gap in some tall, long-stemmed plants was the expressionless face of a spider, making a slow clicking noise. But it was not that which made him recoil in shock. It was the fact that the creature he was looking at was larger than a man. He was motionless for a time, his breath stuck in his throat. He stared at the monster. It stared back with 8 eyes. After what must have seemed like an eternity, he turned and sprinted, only to hear with horror the sound of scuttling behind him. Eventually the beast caught up with him, pushed him to the ground with 2 small front claws, and circled him with the other 8 legs. Twice he attempted to get up, but was violently whacked back into the dirt. On the 3rd attempt he escaped, but was almost immediately then caught by its front claws, which dangled him in front of the arachnid's jaws. He thrashed and kicked, causing the spider to grip more tightly with its claws, leaving bloody gashes in his shoulders. He managed to kick in one of its eyes, which made it relinquish him and cower. Using this to his advantage, the man began to climb up the valley wall, despite knowing that it would be impossible to reach the top. He spotted a small ledge and climbed onto it. Below him, the gargantuan animal clicked loudly, thrusting out its claws and legs, but unable to climb up the wall. After some time, he realized the creature was never going to stop pursuing him, and that he had to climb from the ledge out of the valley. He eventually did so using a fallen tree branch that was hanging precariously on the edge of the valley wall, and sprinted as fast as he could from the spider's lair. After 2 days of wandering the jungle, he was discovered by a member of his platoon, who took him back to base, where his wounds were immediately treated. Upon telling the other men what had happened, they assumed he had become unconscious, and the whole event was an hallucination after he sustained the injuries from ordinary events that would occur to someone lost and panicking. He maintains to this day, however, that his story is true. From a biological point of view, it is highly unlikely that any spider could grow so big through freak mutation or a genetic anomaly, but not entirely impossible. It is also not impossible, but highly unlikely, that the spider was a species of arachnid which had adapted to being large, but is now rare or extinct. The man could be lying, but how much more romantic it is to think that deep within the Vietnamese jungle, there lurked the last of some prehistoric species, or some freak monster, hunting those that found themselves in its lair. And as one final note, may I add, the man whom told me this story showed me his shoulders as evidence, and indeed, from the top of the shoulder to the chest, they had long-time faded wounds, just as his story claimed.
First, a little bit of context. Be my grandfather. Drafted, sent to Nam, infantryman private. On top of this, my grandfather is really short, like 5 foot 4 inches short. Gets assigned as a tunnel rat. Disarm explosives and booby traps above ground. Fight through and destroy Viet Cong tunnels below ground. Well, fuck me as well, shoot me right now. Another guy in his platoon, half Hispanic, is short. Not as short as him, but still short. His name is Daniel, and is assigned as a tunnel rat with my grandfather. Together they go on amazing subterranean adventures. JK, some of the shit they saw was, according to my grandfather, horrifying and mind-boggling. Story 1. Sent to clear out and destroy the tunnels. Equipped with a shitty flashlight, bayonet, some explosives, and an old revolver, because the M1911 were apparently shit for clearing out tunnels. Basic mission. They've done this a couple times before by now. Tunnels are pretty small, even for a rat tunnel. Not finding any traps or Viet Cong, the tunnels almost seem abandoned. Whatever. They stay on guard for booby traps or armed gooks lurking behind corners. Come to a larger section in the tunnels, they can stop crawling and go into a crouching, half-standing position. They can hear water running through the tunnel, start to think that they either are above a river or that the tunnel just lead into a watery cavern. Daniel shines flashlight over to the other side of the room, sees about 4 completely massive spiders. My grandfather says that they were longer than a foot, and each had a leg span of about 2.0 to 2.5 feet. 3 of them were bunched up right next to each other. One was resting about 3 feet away from the cluster. My grandfather hates spiders. He sits there paralyzed. Both of them sit there quietly, just staring at the spiders. This goes on for about 2 minutes. Grandfather takes his eyes off the cluster, looks towards the other one resting alone. It's not there. It's not there. My grandfather looks around and sees the spider on his left, slowly but steadily advancing towards them. He screams, fires at the thing. Doesn't even seem to slow it down. He hauls ass back up the tunnel, with Daniel following close behind him. Daniel throws a grenade into the chamber as they are climbing back up through the tunnels. Make it out, screaming and yelling about spiders. Nothing follows them out, must have died from the grenade, or it just stopped pursuing them. My grandfather told me after the story that he is pretty sure that it wasn't even a Viet Cong tunnel they climbed into, but a tunnel that the spiders themselves made. Story 2. This one is shorter. Once again, crawling underground to destroy a Viet Cong tunnel. Crouch, and walking through the tunnels, they find a not-so-hidden booby trap. It's one of those ones booby traps that would release a bunch of scorpions or snakes upon tripping it. Grandfather and Daniel stop to consider their options, figure that they might be able to disarm the trap. How hard could it be? Pretty hard, apparently. This one was very complex for some reason. Not sure how to disarm the trap without releasing poisonous death animals. They decide to just blow the fucker up, hope that the tunnel doesn't collapse. America.png. Back up a good bit, lob a grenade over in the general direction. Wait. Collateral damage. Trap is gone. Continue forward. As they get to where the former trap was, they notice another tunnel, exposed by the grenade. Out of the new tunnel comes a 5-foot-long centipede, which barrels right past them and down deeper into the tunnels. Fuck this .jpg. Not wanting another incident like with the spiders, they plant their charges and haul ass out of the tunnel. They make it out of the tunnels, shaken, but no worse for wear. Pic-related is the first thing Google gave me when I typed in Vietnam centipede. Story 3. About halfway through the war, orders to clear out some tunnels. Start crawling through. Start faintly hearing voices, either gooks or running water. Keep working their way through the tunnels. Voices get louder and louder. Oh fuck, this isn't water. Realize that they are probably really close to a room full of gooks. Decide to ambush them, then blow up the tunnels. Pull out their revolvers and rush further down into the caves. Fall into a spacious room. Large white eyes all around them. Fuck, that's a lot of gooks. Raising his flashlight, he notices they are not Viet Cong. According to my grandfather, they were about 3 to 4 feet tall, lanky, white, and had big eyes and ears. They were each wearing a bunch of different clothes, some obviously from looted corpses. Others were basically just wearing rags. They make a hissing sound at him and Daniel and start running deeper into the tunnels. Grandfather and Daniel are kind of awestruck and don't know what to do. Daniel keeps going on about Latin American folklore involving gnomes and shit. They eventually just climb out and report the tunnels as being abandoned. Pic-related is apparently a Latin American gnome. Story 4. Last paranormal story I have. Even I have a hard time believing this one at times, but my grandfather was almost certainly sincere when telling it. He was crying and absolutely racked with grief. This one is also a two-parter. Near the end of the war, once again, clearing out tunnels. No creepy crawlies thus far. Crawling through, they realize that this tunnel leads into a cave of some sort. They explore the cave for a bit. They are about to head back up when they realize that there is a light coming from one of the passages in the cave. Not either of their lights. Oh shit. They grasp their revolvers and walk through the passage. My grandfather says that they walked into a well-lit room filled with brightly colored plant life that they couldn't recognize. The light was coming from an orb on the ceiling of the cave, vividly colored birds flying around everywhere. What the actual fuck is this place? Him and Daniel explore a little. Among other things, he finds spiky red fruit the size of a watermelon and a bright yellow pool of water. Grandfather says it looked like he was in a fever dream. They head towards the back of the room, find a stone altar. Blood is stained across the stone, and there is a couple of knives and other tools lying about stone. Their curiosity turns into dread. They turn around to get the hell out of there. They stop. There are 5 reptilian-looking humanoids staring at them. Says they were about 5.5 feet tall, blackish green, and scaly. They all appear to be wearing robes of some sort. Without hesitating, my grandfather and Daniel fire upon the creatures. One goes down, another shrieks out in pain. The room gets extraordinarily bright, and my grandfather passes out. Grandfather wakes up, back in the main part of the cave. The passage him and Daniel went down is gone. Daniel is also lying next to him, but is barely breathing. My grandfather can only do so much for him down here, and drags Daniel out of the cave and back up through the tunnels. He gets back out and hauls up Daniel. They grab him and send him off to get medical attention. After pulling Daniel out of the cave, grandfather remembers about what he saw in the cave. Says that his vision once again goes black and that he can't even remember the next 2 days. According to the other guys in his platoon, my grandfather was in a state of shock. He apparently could barely speak and stuttered a lot, almost like he was shell-shocked or something. He was also sent to get medical attention. 2 days later, he mostly recovers. He goes back, asks the platoon about Daniel. Apparently, he died shortly after being pulled out of the tunnels. Grandfather breaks down. Apparently, the war was close to ending after that. He only delved into 2 more tunnels after that experience. He legitimately hated anything subterranean after that. He despised caving, insects, and lizards, and even requested to be cremated so that he wouldn't be buried underground. I showed him a picture of a generic reptilian alien, pick-related, and he just about had a heart attack. He said that it just needed to be blacker, but that besides that, it was pretty close.